Imagine walking through your city on a Sunday morning. The streets are empty, the shops are closed, buses sit idle, and the markets are silent. This is not a moment of calm. It is a ghost town and a message carried by silence. You are welcome to the Beyond Africa podcast with me, your host, Ngalim Bernard. At the Beyond Africa podcast, we share African stories that change lives. Before I go into the conversation we have today, please thank you so much for watching. Thank you for subscribing, liking, commenting, and sharing. That is the best way you let us know that our content brings value to you. And we would continue bringing this value to you from Cameroonian issues and African issues, all with the intention of improving our lives in Cameroon and across the continent. Let us go into the substance of our conversation today. President Issa Chiruma Bakari has called on Cameroonians to observe this silence on Sunday, on Monday, and on Tuesday. This is in the context in which President Chiruma has asked Cameroonians to ignore the regional elections. But according to him, these regional elections are simply flawed. They lack the legal and political legitimacy to reflect the will of the people, even though they are an indirect election. Let me read his letter for you to understand why his party is not taking part in this election on Sunday, November 30, 2025. And remember, he is asking Cameroonians to stay home on this day and on Monday and then on Tuesday. Let me read his letter. Following the publication of an article in L'Oeil du Sahel on November 27, 2025, claiming that my party would participate in the upcoming regional elections, I wish to issue a solemn, clear, and definite denial of this erroneous assertion. In the current context of national mourning, profound moral turmoil, and a major post-election crisis, my party cannot afford to normalize any form of institutional activity. We are emerging from an electoral process marked by massive fraud, the confiscation of the popular verdict, and bloody repression that has cost the lives of many compatriots. Families are mourning. Young people are still imprisoned, and the entire nation is waiting for truth and justice. Under these circumstances, any participation in an electoral process organized by the contested institutions would amount to legitimizing disorder and turning our backs on the sacrifice of those who fell for democracy. The CNSF remains united behind the voice of its legitimate authorities. The political message of the movement in this phase of historical clarification cannot remain ambiguous. I solemnly reiterate that the focus of our struggle remains popular legitimacy, historical justice, and the moral reconstruction of our country. This requires each of us to be rigorous, disciplined, and loyal to the higher interests of Cameroon. I salute the commitment of those who, with dignity, are working to restore the truth and sovereignty of the people. No distraction, no local maneuvering or individual statement, even if reported in the press, will divert us from the focus we have collectively set for ourselves. Cameroon deserves better than amnesia and compromise. It demands memory, responsibility, and vision. Long live the Republic, long live Cameroon. Issa Chiruma Bakari, National President of the CNSF, President-elect of the Republic of Cameroon. This is President Issa Chiruma Bakari's statement regarding the elections on Sunday. But what are the problems? The first problem lies with ELECAM, Cameroon's electoral management body, legally tasked with organizing free and fair elections. But in practice, however, it answers to the presidency. Its leaders are appointed by Paul Biya and can be removed at his discretion. Observers have documented persistent irregularities like incomplete or outdated voter rolls, inaccessible polling stations, and obstacles to independent observers. Millions of citizens cannot be confident that their votes will count. When the institution meant to protect democracy is itself compromised, elections become a formality rather than a genuine expression of the public will. Next, the Ministry of Territorial Administration, or MINAT, is formally responsible for administrative oversight. But in practice, it wields enormous influence over the political process, from deploying security forces to intimidating voters to shutting down opposition coalitions like the APC and the APT before the presidential elections. And MINAT actively shapes who can participate in the elections and how. You would remember the story of Manidem between Kamto Maurice and Anissa Ekane on the one hand, and on the other side, Yebga Diodone, when the website of MINAT was hacked, possibly by the MINAT himself or by his own team, just to ensure that Yebga Diodone appeared on the website as the legitimate representative of Manidem, whereas everyone, even MINAT and Elekam, knew that Anissa Ekane was and is the legitimate representative of Mandem. MINAT even goes as far as levying accusations of mismanagement or illicit funding against organizations simply as a tool to suspend civil society groups like REDAC. For those who know, Barrister Alice Nkom is the leader of REDAC, and she is also the spokesperson of Issa Chiruma Bakari at this point. All the gymnastics around civil society curtailing and political party suppression and oppression falls well within the active opposition in Cameroon. To this extent, MINAT has made it appear that regulatory enforcement is often a pretext to limit independent political activity. You can also see how MINAT has suspended the extraordinary convention of the MRC that was supposed to be organized to elect the new chairman of the party. I'm not sure of the details, but MINAT has suspended them from organizing that convention. But more importantly, do you know MINAT has accused Cameroonians who demonstrate and respect ghost towns of being drug addicts? This is the condescending attitude that Cameroonians are kicking against. Cameroonians need to be respected. If their cries against electoral fraud meet fire, bullets, and accusations of drug addiction, why does it matter that they vote or participate in anything organized by the government? When their voices don't matter, when their presence is insulted, and their grievances are rubbished and termed drug addiction. So, even if the elections go ahead, their outcomes are predetermined by design. Cameroonians don't doubt who is going to win the elections. Regional councillors are elected indirectly by municipal councillors and traditional chiefs, many of whom are loyal to the ruling regime. These councils control regional budgets, local priorities, and election of senators, all without real input from the public. And as loyalty goes, MINAT is responsible for designation, promotion, and discussions with traditional authorities and municipal councillors. So tell me, how is there any freedom in the process? In short, citizens have no direct influence over the very institutions that are meant to represent them. Elections in this context are largely symbolic, especially when we have not a Ministry of Territorial Administration that imposes itself by force on both citizens and institutions. Who forgets the most immediate elections? The recent presidential election of 12 October 2025 provides even more context relevant for understanding why elections are just symbolic and may not matter. Allegations of rigging, voter intimidation, and restricted civic space have fueled wide distrust on elections. Protests were met with arrests, violence, and fatalities, and some people were even killed. MINAT again was out in the streets throughout the country saying all those who were killed during the protest were assailants attacking the military. This is nothing but unfounded. Those who were killed were simply people who were demonstrating because they wanted two things. The first thing, celebrating the victory from the ballot box as they saw at the polling stations. And the second thing, they wanted the Constitutional Council to declare the results from the ballot box as they were without any modification. Now, they are accused of manipulation, accused as being drug addicts. Some were even killed. that is a stretch too far under the circumstances. That is why in this environment, Issa Chiruma Bakari has called for ghost towns as a form of civic resistance. By staying home, closing shops, and letting the streets fall silent, citizens are simply signaling a refusal to legitimize a system that denies them a real voice. It is a non-violent measure that is simply aimed at reclaiming legitimacy. Ghost towns, where everything goes shut and silent, are the best form of civic disobedience because they are quiet, non-confrontational, and they do not give room for the other side to claim that those who are respecting the ghost towns are assailants because you are simply called upon to remain in your home. And actually, the upcoming regional elections are not a path to any meaningful representation. So giving it any form of legality or legitimacy is simply uncalled for. The weak electoral bodies and MINAT overreach, including the indirect selection of councillors and a climate of intimidation, all combine to ensure that the predetermined outcomes go in favor of Paul Biya. When you look at it from the outside, it looks like elections are being organized. But when you go inside, you see that it is a system designed to encourage or enforce one line of thought, one line of action, one line of politicking, which is simply ensuring that this current regime secures its power in place with the impression or giving the impression to outsiders that they are organizing democratic processes to create these institutions. They are not. Why? Because elections under these conditions serve more to consolidate power than to reflect the people's will. Any claim of legitimacy is undermined by structural and procedural deficiencies that we have already outlined in this brief reflection. The lesson is clear. Meaningful reform requires structural change. Independent electoral commissions, transparent voter registration, protection of civil space, and direct elections for regional councillors are prerequisites for a genuine democracy. All these institutions in Cameroon, be they the Senate, be they the National Assembly, Regional Assembly, even municipal councillors, have no role. The government in Yaoundé has absolute powers in its hands. So all these institutions that are organized here and there, giving the impression that there is democracy in Cameroon through checks and balances by these different institutions, are simply a farce. These institutions have no role, they control nothing, and if all these institutions in Cameroon are closed and only the presidency is operating, Cameroon is going to operate on the same frequency as it is today without one problem. Why? The presidency is too strong, and that presidency is governing the country as it wishes. So close all these institutions. If you doubt me, try it for the next 3 months. Close everything: National Assembly, Supreme Court, courts, councils, everything. The country will still function as it is functioning. But if you want any change, there must be a change in the institutions, a change in the way the governance structure is organized, and citizen actions like ghost towns remain one of the few ways to assert political agency to cause that change. When you think about the vote on October 12th and the ghost towns that are organized today and the future of Cameroon, Cameroonians simply did not vote in October. They demanded that their voices mattered, because when you put the vote on October 12th together with the demonstrations called for by President Issa Chiruma Bakari and the ghost towns, you see the legitimacy flowing from the ballot box to the streets and to the ghost towns. And as the November 30 elections approach, the struggle for the respect of the vote of October 12th simply continues. It was not in the ballot box alone, but in the courage that Cameroonians have mounted since October 12th to resist the system that has silenced Cameroonian voices. Ghost towns, silent streets, closed doors, and what have you are not signs of defeat. They are simply a sign that citizens want their voices to be heard. And citizens are communicating in silence because sometimes silence is loud enough that when it speaks, the government understands better. I encourage you to watch the next video that comes after this because it explains to you why ghost towns are a powerful instrument to bring change. They are a proof that citizens still hold power when institutions fail. And until reforms arrive, this silence would definitely be speaking louder than any ballot. This silence would penetrate the centers of power because staying home fragilizes the economy. Don't forget, this regime wants you to continue businesses because it is from the businesses that they generate taxes, and those taxes generate money for them, the money that they embezzle, the money that they use in procuring or in buying weapons and other tactical gear that they use on suppressing the voices of citizens. Once Cameroonians prevent them from having this money that is being used illegally on Cameroonians, they are definitely going to sit down and talk. They are definitely going to review their processes. And this is in line with what Issa Chiroma Bakare is asking for. Ghost towns, silence, restraint, and listening to what has to come next is very important, because what comes next is definitely going to be a flow and a continuation of the ghost towns. Generally, the strategies are always simple. Take them easy and encourage the other side to talk. Encourage the regime to speak. But the language that the regime has been speaking all this while has not been encouraging. What have they been doing? They've deployed Atonganji throughout the country, where he has minimized the number of about 200 and something people who were killed and more than 1,000 that were detained illegally. His numbers are nothing near 1/100th of what happened. That is a language that the regime understands. But Issa Chiroma Bakare has been very reasonable, very steadfast, and very calculative in the steps he's asking Cameroonians to take. So, stay your guard and remember, the elections of November 30 are an indirect election that has nothing to do with you. However, whether the elections were direct or indirect, the institutions that are going to be formed on that day have nothing to do with the way you live your life, with the way I live my life, simply because Cameroon has a very strong presidency that is in Yaoundé. And if that presidency does not release some of the powers, nothing is ever going to change in Cameroon. Thank you for watching the Beyond Africa podcast with me, Ngalim Bernard, your host. What a time to be alive. What a time to follow Cameroonian politics.